was good. I think they liked it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How about the audience?
The audience, they responded at the right spots, yeah. They laughed when they were supposed to laugh, and they kind of oohed and awed when they were supposed to ooh and ah, so I think they got it.
For some, it may be hard to believe that this gangly kid would become one of the greatest directors in modern film history. At nearly 50 years old and with 8 films under his belt, Paul Thomas Anderson has become one of the most prolific directors of his time. With films ranging from broad epics to small-scale indie comedies, it piques the question, how did Anderson get here? Paul's story begins deep in the heart of the San Fernando Valley in the 1960s. Anderson's father, Ernie Anderson, was a popular radio and television host. He did voiceovers for thousands of commercials and TV shows, but most of all was famous for the appearance as his character Ghoulardi, a fictional character based on B-grade horror movies.
Hello! Funny, the phone's still ringing. Maybe I better hang up.
Rising from just doing adverts for the Love Boat, Ernie became the official voice from ABC, moved to a large house in the San Fernando Valley, and became friends with many comics. Robert Ridgely, Harvey Korman, Tim Conway among them.
Please, doctor! Okay. See? I was right. What? Well, you got it all icky. Here you go. Better rinse out a little bit. There you go. Just...
Collectively, these men appeared on Get Smart, The Carol Burnett Show, High Anxiety, Blazing Saddles. They were comics. They didn't take show business seriously. They liked to party and have a good time. The Anderson home was always populated with wildly entertaining comedians and entertainers. Ernie had many celebrity friends. According to Conway, Ernie was the inspiration for the Burt Reynolds character in Boogie Nights. Carefree but in control, and immensely successful with his passion, he would be the giving role model his son Paul needed.
A special night for MacGyver. An oil rig fire burns out of control.
Dynamite wouldn't hurt.
And to shut it down, he's forced to make a suicide run.
Break, you're gone!
A special MacGyver at 8/7 Central.
Paul was born in 1970, the third youngest of 9 children. From an early age, Paul was in need of a stabilizing force. He admired his dad, who would pull practical jokes all the time, and would desperately seek attention. Overshadowed by all of his older siblings, worshipping his dad, trying to get into his inner circle.
Paul was called sweet and charismatic by his teachers, but he was known to hold in anger from a young age.
This is demonstrated here in a scene from Punch Drunk Love. Paul attended the elite private school Buckley. He ran with a group of rich kids, including Shane Conrad, the son of actor Robert Conrad. At the age of 12, Paul's father gave him his first camera, a Boxy Betamax.
There's something that a lot of people don't realize, and that's the importance of good transportation. Jordan, are you filming me or are you filming?
Buddy, I just keep going. I've got you.
Okay. You look like you're framing my chest.
No, I'm not.
You got me?
Yeah.
Okay. If the trucks aren't here, nothing's here.
As a boy, Paul always used his camera to film everything he saw. Paul recorded videos of his dog, his neighbor's pony, and other crazy schemes he and his friends would pull off. Whereas some experimented with drugs, Anderson said the filmmaking rush he got was all from TPing houses, lighting off fireworks, and filming it. One time, Paul and his friends duct-taped cameras to their heads and sprayed each other with water guns, recording the entire event. It reached a point where Steve Garrett's parents would say, "You're all to stay away from the house, especially Paul." Anderson's parents came to the conclusion that he needed discipline too. They sent him to a private school, Cushing Academy, in Boston. A sophomore in high school, Anderson was away from his family and friends. Anderson's friends think this affected him since he was so far away from his father, the role model he loved so much. Loneliness, isolation, and the road to redemption are common themes in Paul Thomas Anderson's filmography. His films often feature central characters who are lacking a connection. They're almost always disenchanted or striving for something better than what they have. There's also a certain honesty to a scene like the one in Boogie Nights, where Dirk is confronted by his mother. Although close with his father, Anderson was known to bicker with his mother, Edwina. While his early shorts just saw him experimenting, his feature films really dabbled into his personal life and issues. After spending a year away in Boston at Cushing Academy, Anderson eventually convinced his parents to let him return to Montclair Prep, where he returned to meet his friend Shane Conrad and making movies. Paul was a popular junior. He'd convince his teachers to let him leave class early to go on a mysterious errand, and despite never showing up to class, would always have a smile when he did. Anderson was just a teenager, but his roots as a filmmaker were taking place. When Midnight Run came out in the summer of 1988, Anderson saw it multiple times. He enjoyed it, but particularly liked the performance of one Philip Baker Hall in his role as a Las Vegas concierge. Anderson admired the intensity of the actor who seemingly had such a small role, mesmerized enough by his performance to remember the character's name in Midnight Run, Sidney. The result was a script Anderson would bang out senior year in high school. Anderson was a popular student. He was evasive from class, but was always charismatic with his teachers and had a way of getting out of class all the time. CBS Radford Studios was located right in Anderson's backyard. He figured out every way to sneak past the gate. He read Variety and The Hollywood Reporter, seeing what shows were being shot there at the time. As a teenager in high school, it would be completely normal for Paul to walk onto any film set at CBS Radford lot. He would stealthily observe the productions as they went on, and he made connections early on. One of Paul's friends had a parent who was a producer on many shows at CBS Radford lot. He introduced him to director Joel Schumacher on the set of his film The Lost Boys. Anderson also frequented his local Cineplex. He avoided fluff like Dirty Dancing and liked to see independent films. One of his favorites from his youth is The Indian Runner. Other films that proved strongly influential in Anderson's filmmaking style was Robert Downey Sr.'s Putney Swope. Released in 1969, a year before Anderson was born, he enjoyed this film because of its political satire. There's an edgy content to it that Anderson didn't know he could make. He cites Robert Downey Sr. as being influential to his films, exploring with experimental filmmaking techniques Anderson didn't even know could be put onto film. Anderson described the film as such an early influence that he went as far to name the character from Boogie Nights Buck Swope, a tribute to the film. And Downey Sr. wasn't the only artist who had a strong influence on Anderson's work. Another contemporary director of the time who Anderson admired was Robert Altman. Aside from visual comparisons, Altman's films use hyperlink narrative, for which Anderson popularized. Altman's films often lampooned American life and culture. Some featured large ensemble casts, something that would become very popular in Anderson's later work. When they weren't sneaking onto studio lots, Anderson would use his brothers and Conrad and Steve Garrett as his handymen, gathering other acquaintances as stars, stuntmen, and crew, and made various parody films. He made a parody of Miami Vice called Brock Landers, which would later appear as the character given to Mark Wahlberg's porn detective in Boogie Nights. He also made parodies of the Terminator film, as well as What's Up, Tiger Lily. Anderson would meet more kids involved in movies and met Michael Stein, an actor. They made a mockumentary movie called The Spastic Olympics, which focused on goofy events like Anderson running shirtless through traffic on Ventura Boulevard with his shirt off covered in Rice Krispies. Anderson hadn't branched out into feature-length films. He focused on shorts that he made with his friends at home. Anderson's playing hooky and gathering his friends to make impromptu film crews would pay off in his senior year. After making various short films. At age 17, he wrote and produced his first short film, the half-hour Dirk Diggler story, which would later become Boogie Nights. Utilizing family, friend, and school acquaintances, Anderson strapped together his cast. 17 years old at the start of production, Anderson's 35-minute film was considered his first narrative.
Please! Say, meatballs!
He was a professional. All the way up until the end, he was a professional.
Paul Thomas Anderson got the idea to make the Dirk Diggler story from This Is Spinal Tap, a mockumentary comedy. Anderson pitched his film to Stein. He wanted to make a film about John C. Holmes, an American pornographer and actor. Anderson based Dirk Diggler on Holmes. He based several other characters in the film on real-life pornographers, like Shauna Grant and Veronica Hart.
Dirk's career had dropped once again, but this time there was no climbing back up. Out of work?
Anderson cast his father, Ernie Anderson, as the narrator of the film. His father's good friend, Robert Ridgely, also an actor, would play the producer of the pornographic film the Dirk Diggler character stars in. He would reprise this role in Boogie Nights as Colonel James. The next years of Anderson's life would be spent like any 18-year-old, going to college, where Anderson would enroll at Santa Monica University. He briefly attended Emerson for 2 semesters, where his instructor was David Foster Wallace. Anderson had regular phone calls with the professor and called him one of the most influential people he would ever meet. Anderson found a unique voice in these artists. All of Anderson's films have style that pull from artists he loves. He eventually went to New York University, where he infamously only stayed for 2 days. He was prompted to do this after an instructor told him, if anyone is in here to write Terminator 2, get out.
What if I do want to write Terminator 2? What if someone sitting next to me wants to write? You know, he was sort of instantly saying, you know, we write serious films here, you know. Terminator 2 is a pretty awesome movie.
Anderson was not discouraged by his teacher's remarks. He did, however, decide to drop out of film school. He knew if he was going to make films, he had to do it himself. After dropping out of NYU, Anderson spent most of his time working around the fringes of the entertainment industry. He worked as a production assistant for various TV shows. He did a commercial for Fresh Jive, a clothing brand, shooting it almost like a mini gangster film with multiple characters. It was as a production assistant with Quiz Kids that Anderson would gain the idea for his movie Magnolia. Although the Quiz Kids challenge provided a story for a film, Paul's other production assistant jobs would prove instrumental in gaining him a career. His father's friend, Robert Conrad, helped him land a production assistant job on a film called Sworn to Vengeance, starring Tom Atkins and himself. Anderson's friendship with Shane Conrad would also prove to be helpful in getting him into movie premieres. He convinced Shane to take him instead of his girlfriend to a screening of Phil Joannoud's movie, Final Analysis. Anderson even managed to spend 45 minutes talking to Joannoud after the film. Determined to get the Dirk Diggler story in the right hands, Anderson went to a premiere of The Commitments, an Alan Parker film. As Shane Conrad remembers it, Parker was pulling away from the movie premiere when Anderson approached his window, hurled the tape through it, and told him to have a look. Parker would call Anderson back from London, telling him he thought the film was brilliant. While Paul was working as a production assistant on a PBS movie, he met Philip Baker Hall, an actor he admired. He showed Hall the script for a story about 5 people connected through a $20 bill. Hall read the script and was impressed. Anderson gave a copy of the script for his short Cigarettes and Coffee to Philip Baker Hall, who compared it to the first work written by Shakespeare. Anderson had to cast professional actors to round out his film. He got Kirk Baltz from Reservoir Dogs, as well as Miguel Ferrer from Twin Peaks, to round out the cast. The complexity of shooting at an actual diner required the producer to rent a diner in the Gorman Pass in LA. Actors were brought out, and the shoot was successful. With a total budget of $20,000, a Fisher Dolly camera, and a cinematographer, Anderson was able to organize his hectic shoot. He was not used to working with professional actors, and he described the shoot as chaotic. Nevertheless, Anderson had a clear vision for his characters, and the film went on to become a success. With sharp directing, clever writing, and a clever use of multiple narratives, Anderson got recognition for this feature. He was chosen to be among the prestigious Sundance Institute. Using his high school script Sydney, he banged out Cigarettes and Coffee into a feature-length film, Hard Eight. Anderson's debut feature was well received and a critical success. It was a crime thriller with clever writing. Anderson had envisioned casting Hall from the start. He also cast newcomers like John C. Reilly, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Samuel L. Jackson, who had just starred in Pulp Fiction. Hard Eight showed Anderson could work with professional actors. It also showed the first collaboration with Philip Seymour Hoffman, who would go on to appear in all of his movies except for There Will Be Blood and Phantom Thread, which was completed after his death. Hoffman would go on to appear in Anderson's second feature, his big breakout Boogie Nights. The 2.5-hour movie was adapted from Anderson's 30-minute Dirk Diggler short film. Studio of New Line Cinema chief Michael DeLuca agreed to the extended runtime, as Anderson initially wanted a rating of NC-17. Anderson cast many popular actors from the 90s in his film, but among the hardest to cast was the role of Dirk Diggler. That would go to Mark Wahlberg, who was picked after meeting with Leonardo DiCaprio, who couldn't star in the film due to being in Titanic. and Joaquin Phoenix, who did not want to be in a film involving pornography.
The thing about all of these characters is that they're all searching for their dignity, you know? Sort of just trying to do good, you know?
Released in Toronto and at the New York Film Festival, Boogie Nights launched Anderson into stardom. The performances of Julianne Moore and Burt Reynolds were both acclaimed, but the eyes were on 27-year-old Paul Thomas Anderson, whose work was being compared to Nashville, The Player, and Pulp Fiction, with its sweep and variety of characters. It launched Anderson to rock star director status. On top of the box office success, Boogie Nights was a critical success and scored favorably well with critics. It's regarded as one of the best 70 period films to date. Eager to work with the talented young director again, New Line Cinema courted Anderson, giving him a blank check for his next project. Anderson was steadily taking in his newfound celebrity as well. In the late 90s, Anderson began dating pop star Fiona Apple. Though she recalls a somewhat tumultuous relationship, Anderson directed many of her music videos from the late 90s to
fast as you can, baby, run free yourself up as fast as you can.
Anderson pitched his next project to producers. It was a 3-hour epic and he had Apple on as a producer. It used a multi-arc hyperlink narrative for which Anderson had become famous. Magnolia was considered Anderson's mastercraft at the time and won numerous awards. Magnolia was a success for a variety of reasons. It showed that Anderson had improved upon his ensemble direction, and he had solid actors. Tom Cruise's performance was acclaimed. He was nominated for an Oscar. Amy Mann's score was also nominated for an Oscar, and featured the entire cast of the film singing in unison. Magnolia improved on the themes that Boogie Nights had shown already. Fraternity found family. Magnolia directly showed the relationship between parents and children and the conflicts that lie there. It's a huge improvement over the one scene with Dirk and his mother. The film presents the entangled lives of several people over the course of 24 hours in the San Fernando Valley. It's flashy, like Boogie Nights, but more personal. Legendary Swedish filmmaker Ingmar Bergman cited Magnolia as an example of the strength of American cinema. Among the works that inspired Magnolia, there is Robert Altman's Shortcuts, a 1993 film based on the writings of Raymond Carver that sees many characters intertwine. To accomplish his Altman style, he recruited Robert Elswit, a DP. As director of photography, he would have to do the same zooms that Altman had captured in Shortcuts in The Player. It was shot on film with Panavision lenses to accompany all the wide shots of the actors. It used extensive practical effects during the climax of the film, where frogs fall from the sky. Like Boogie Nights, it had a strong ensemble cast, and the reviews showed.
To Magnolia, which I think is one of the best films of the year, and certainly one of the most audacious, which is not exactly saying the same thing. It cuts back and forth between several stories that unfold in a rainy Los Angeles, where fathers and children are at war, where love seems impossible, where everyone seems to be half into show business, and where everyone seems to be half dead.
How does one move on from the success of this film? Anderson, who was not even 30, was being compared to Orson Welles and called a prodigy. He knew what he wanted to do for his next film. Anderson decided to change expectations. He made his next film a 90-minute comedy starring Adam Sandler. Sandler, who is mostly known for doing mediocre comedy films, was a peculiar choice according to most critics at the time. Anderson cited he enjoyed Sandler's humor. Anderson does away with all the tropes that made him popular with Magnolia and Boogie Nights. This is a small, dense romantic comedy. It packs the quirks of Anderson's other work. He uses a John Bryan score to illustrate anxiety and make the viewer feel uncomfortable.
Doesn't usually dress like that.
The film was not a box office success, but opened to mainly positive reviews in 2002. Paul Thomas Anderson won a Director's Award at the Cannes Film Festival, and Adam Sandler was praised.
Some of us thought you were actually completely out of your mind when you cast Adam Sandler in this movie, because we had preconceived ideas of the kind of comedies he has made, and we have a notion that you don't make those kind of movies.
He made me laugh. Really, he just makes me laugh.
There's a productive chemistry between Adam Sandler and Paul Thomas Anderson. that stems from his ability to work with the actor who he clearly idolizes. And he does get a comedic role from Sandler. Also, he gets some tragedy in there. That's the beauty of Paul Thomas Anderson. Actors clearly love to work with him too, and Sandler delivers his best performance here. The praise given to Adam Sandler is a reason actors are drawn to Anderson's work. Tom Cruise was drawn to the film on the set of Eyes Wide Shut and initially didn't want to take it, but was courted to by the president of New Line Cinema and Anderson. It's now considered one of Tom Cruise's best roles, as he gives a great performance in it. Cruise at the time was originally a poster boy for Hollywood blockbusters and action films.
The role of Frank T.J. Mackey is angry, narcissistic, and lustful. Like many of Anderson's characters, he's hurting underneath. Only Frank appears confident, arrogant, and still distasteful on the surface. Cruise brings this character to life.
Another frequent Anderson collaborator is John C. Reilly, who appears as the good-natured cop, Jim Curring, in Magnolia. Although the lonely police officer is searching for love, but he has trouble making emotional connections. This is demonstrated in a scene where he berates a young boy rapper who's cursing in his rap-filled monologue. Problems in Anderson's movies often stem from generations not being able to understand each other. His casting has led to many of his actors being nominated for Oscars. Burt Reynolds and Julianne Moore for Boogie Nights, Cruise for Magnolia, and this trend would continue on with his future works. With his first three films, Hard Eight, Boogie Nights, and Magnolia, Anderson explored themes of dysfunctional families, alienation, and loneliness. Punch Drunk Love has similar themes, but explores a different visual style. Shedding the influences and references to earlier films, it's more surreal, has a heightened sense of reality, and is short at 90 minutes. Around the time Punch Drunk Love was released, Anderson broke up with his then-girlfriend, Fiona Apple, and started dating SNL alum and comedian Maya Rudolph. Over the course of their relationship, Apple and Anderson made 4 music videos together. The videos retain the certain visual style that his films exhibit. There's a cinematic quality with low lighting, like Magnolia's bar scenes. This music video uses dancers and elaborate tracking shots, like Boogie Nights or Magnolia, where the actors and dancers have to sync with the camera. Aside from the pulls and zooms, it always uses Anderson's signature whip pan.
Hey, Eddie! Come here a second, will you?
Jack, I could do it again if you need a close-up.
When I found the book, it was about 6 or 7 years ago. So, obviously, I'm not living in a bubble, and there's a lot of things going on. And being from California, not that far from the oil fields of Bakersfield, and the kind of curiosity about what the hell is this stuff, and how do they get it out of the ground?
It's a great American story.
It is a great. It's
great
sort of irresistible,
story. Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah. All right.
2007 is the year Anderson would grow up. All of his past films had been nostalgic, musically driven even. This found him working outside of the familiar genres he had based most of his earlier films on. It saw him going into original territory. This film focused on ruthlessness. At its center is Daniel Plainview, in an immersive, method-acted performance by Daniel Day-Lewis. He steals the film as an oil baron looking to expand his vast empire, never satisfied with his vast and growing wealth.
I don't want to talk.
And like all Anderson characters, he alienates himself from those closest to him. There Will Be Blood has been compared to Citizen Kane, with its innovative technical style, tricky shots, themes of family, sweeping cinematography, and mediation on capitalism. There Will Be Blood is considered one of the best films of the 21st century. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards and is noted for its cinematography, for which it won an Oscar. Director of photography Robert Elswit is 20 years older than Anderson. He has done cinematography for all of Anderson's films since Hard Eight. In the film, Eli Sunday, who is played by Paul Dano, sells Daniel land for which he believes is worth lots of money as there is oil beneath it. Daniel takes advantage of this. It is far worth more than the sum Eli pays. Daniel despises Eli Plainview because of the way he tries to manipulate his followers through Christianity, where Plainview manipulates them with the prospect of having good schools and water. Daniel slowly becomes less honest and becomes a worse person throughout the film. Daniel evolves from an honest man seeking oil by himself to become corrupt and morally flawed. His tragic character arc shows a greedy man who will stop at nothing and loses everything on the way. It's implied he never really loved H.W. He was only a means for getting business, but that still gives Daniel a reason to send him away and proves how cruel he is. The juxtaposition of oil and religion builds drama. Daniel and Eli are perceived as shadow selves of one another. They overcompensate for their spiritual emptiness by making fair share of empty promises to themselves and the people they meet throughout the film. Even a baptism scene is used in a manipulative way as Daniel tries to get a pipeline built. Key concepts from the film are based on Upton Sinclair's novel Oil. However, Anderson conducted years of research, going to museums and frequenting photographs of the era in order to get a feel for the period. Although he's used these popular Hollywood blockbusters as visual templates for his story, his film is rather original. It has fresh dialogue. As an Entertainment Weekly critic said, "There Will Be Blood is exquisitely intimate, almost a collection of sketches. For a long, slow movie, it speeds. For a story set in the fabled bad old days past, it's got the terrors of modernity in its DNA." It has a lasting pop culture legacy and has been featured on TV shows like Saturday Night Live and South Park. Paul Thomas Anderson's work is drenched in family and the road to happiness. This film is unique because its main character does not end up happy. He ends up with everything he wanted, but he is a villain, and he has drawn away everyone who loved him from the start. It's a movie where the villain gets everything he wants, but still isn't satisfied. He doesn't truly win. It's Anderson's opus on the American dream that critics have called the best of the decade. It won Daniel Day-Lewis's coveted Oscar.
This sprang like a golden sapling out of the mad, beautiful head of Paul Thomas Anderson.
Anderson took a 5-year hiatus following There Will Be Blood. He spent this time working on his next project, The Master. The project initially wasn't picked up. It took several rewrites before the Weinstein Company picked it up for distribution. The Master's script was produced much more loosely than any film Anderson had done before. It consisted of long fragments of dialogue, in the tradition of Ernest Hemingway and John Steinbeck. He based some of it on war stories Jason Robards had told him while on the set of Magnolia. The film follows Freddie Quell, played by Joaquin Phoenix, a disillusioned veteran who returns home from the war. He suffers from PTSD, is clearly sexually frustrated, disillusioned, and an alcoholic. This all changes when Freddie meets the charismatic Lancaster Dodd, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. He is the leader of a Scientology-like cult. He is the titular master. This comes from the idea that Freddie is subservient and is seeking someone he needs as a guide. There's many reasons for this. After the war, he is traumatized and looking for guidance, but he is also a slave to his own issues, such as his alcoholism. The film reiterates the consequences of failing youth that was present in Magnolia. Freddie Quell looks for a place to channel his fears, but Lancaster Dodd, who represents a cult of personality, is not the best person to turn to. In a way, this represents the many cults of personalities that were being fought during the war at the time. This was also in the era of McCarthyism. The film is noteworthy not for its ostensible story, but its acting. The needy, nervous, and alarmingly thin Joaquin Phoenix stands toe-to-toe with the confident, avuncular, comfy generosity of Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. The film is about acting. Seeing Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman share on-screen friction is cinematic pleasure enough. Lancaster Dodd says, "If you find a way to live without serving a master, any master, then let the rest of the world know, will you? For you'd be the first in the history of the world." The movie is above many things about a toxic relationship. Dodd is controlling and emotionally abusive. Here he makes one last devastating attempt to manipulate Freddie once more. He feeds off their pain. However, here he's losing his grip and hardly holding the master of the facade. This film is about the silent masters within us all, vices that run our lives until we find another. Freddie represents something more primal, and in the end, he returns to his former master. He's slavish to his own sexual perversions. This film makes a devastating statement about how free will isn't free.
Here it comes. A large dragon. Teeth. Blood dripping, red eyes. What do I got?
The Master was shot on almost entirely 65mm stock. It was the first film shot in this format since Hamlet. This was also the first time Anderson was not working with his longtime collaborator, Robert Elswit. Instead, he worked with Mihai Malmur. The film was lauded for its cinematography and was considered one of the best films of the year. The performances of Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams, and especially Joaquin Phoenix were praised. This film also feels especially personal to Paul Thomas Anderson. Anderson has recently stated that The Master is his favorite film of his entire filmography. Anderson doesn't slow down, even when he's on hiatus from a film. In 2013, following the success of The Master, Anderson re-teamed with Fiona Apple for a music video called Hot Knife. Aside from his collaborations with Fiona Apple, he's also done music videos recurringly with Radiohead. Tom York and Johnny Greenwood are collaborators on many of his musical scores for There Will Be Blood and Phantom Thread. He directed several music videos for Radiohead, notably Daydreaming. Anderson also directed many music videos for the Jewish American band Haim. He collectively did 4 videos, and many of them have different stylish tributes about them. Summer Girl features long tracking shots, while Valentine is one continuous 360-degree loop.
And I could see for miles, and I've forgotten every line. Now you're saying that you need me, babe. Right now, right now. Now you're saying that you need me, babe. Right now, right now. Ooh, now you're saying that you love me.
His music videos have the same cinematic style as his films. The scene in Magnolia, where everyone sings Amy Mann's Wise Up, is reminiscent of many of his Haim tracking shots. Another collaborator with Paul Thomas Anderson's music videos is Joanna Newsom, who's also an actress. He cast her in his 7th feature, Inherent Vice. Anderson penned the script for Inherent Vice, an adaptation of a Thomas Pynchon novel, concurrently as he was writing The Master. He adapted the 384-page novel word for word and cut it down to make a 2.5-hour juggernaut of a movie. Many regard this as one of Anderson's most baffling films. It is definitely his strangest. While it's an ensemble piece, the film is a far cry from any narrative Anderson had done before. The film is like one giant puzzle piece that doesn't seem to fit together. A reason for this is the language the characters use and the nicknames they give each other. On top of this, there's many contradictions in the story. It's a stoner paranoid detective film, not like The Big Lebowski. Anderson has compared it to Kiss Me Deadly, The Long Goodbye, and especially The Big Sleep. Underneath the cracks of this mystery, there's also a lot of humor, and that goes in the physical comedy of the actors. Inherent Vice also stands out for being the only Pynchon novel to be adapted on screen. His novels are noted for being complex and long. Gravity's Rainbow is one that is over 500 pages. Anderson said he hasn't even read it. The film's main plot follows a detective, played by Joaquin Phoenix, investigates the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend. This is the least clear narrative of anything Anderson's done, but that's on purpose to evoke the style of Pynchon's novel. You're meant to feel as disillusioned as Doc. The film has a bunch of subplots, and it's not that confusing. Here's Paul Thomas Anderson to explain.
Continuing to just spiral you around and get you into a complete paranoid frenzy, but all the while it's all kind of right in front of your nose, but none of it's that insane, and none of it's that convoluted.
The film made numerous top 10 lists for the year and was nominated for 2 Oscars for its screenplay and costume design. It was not a box office success, but praise was towards PTA. Paul would re-team with Radiohead and Tom York for an experimental short film. Paul had directed music videos but wanted to do a film. The song Anemo was created to accompany the album of the same name being released by Tom York. It was a 15-minute short and was played in IMAX theaters and distributed by Netflix on the same day. The film features York's partner and follows a concept from York about workers whose bodies don't work anymore and are being pushed by an invisible force. The team wanted the first sequence to be oppressive and hyper-precise so it feels like a machine, influenced by dystopian stories such as 1984 and Metropolis, and the physical comedy of Charlie Chaplin. Anderson and Radiohead's collaborations have been incredibly unique and both benefiting. They don't seem to be slowing down. In 2016, Anderson got a phone call from Johnny Greenwood, who asked him if he would like to accompany him on a 3-week trip. Anderson said yes eagerly, before he even knew where the destination was. Turns out, Anderson was going to India. Johnny Greenwood wanted him to document the process of him recording a music video and an album for a new track with several collaborating Indian artists. The 52-minute documentary is called Junoon. In 2016, Anderson would recruit Greenwood for his own project, a fashion drama he was making called Phantom Thread. Phantom Thread saw Anderson going back to his stoic filmmaking style that he'd experimented with There Will Be Blood and The Master. The film follows Daniel Day-Lewis as Reynolds Woodcock, a renowned fashion designer who lives with his sister Cyril. He is a dressmaker and a master of his skill, and his dedication to his art keeps him away from having a happy love life. With Paul Thomas Anderson's movies, there's often power struggle between his characters. This is one of his more intimate works. The character of Woodcock is a particular dressmaker and a perfectionist. Like Anderson, who is a skillful filmmaker, it examines how relationships can get in the way of passion, and an artist's struggle to balance out the two. In the film, Woodcock falls in love with a young waitress named Alma, and precariously tries to manage their newfound relationship. This film explores the twisted relationship between the two. He sees her as his muse, almost a living mannequin. Woodcock is surrounded by women. Alma, his client, the women who make his dresses, he's surrounded by women in his life. He also has an obsession with his late mother, who taught him his trade. The film echoes with themes of regret and figures from our past who still haunt us. Anderson's film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Daniel Day-Lewis for Best Actor. However, he lost to Gary Oldman for Darkest Hour. The film is precise in showing Anderson's routine. It's more intimate, like The Master, and still shows all the elements of his previous films, even the looser ones. All of Anderson's films are driven by conflict. Boogie Nights has father and son arguments. In A Found Family, There Will Be Blood shows religion, greed, vengeance, and the cruelty of man, while The Master explored more dominant and submissive relationships, and what vices we are all slaves to. It's also worth noting that Daniel Day-Lewis, who is a method actor, fell into a deep depression during the shooting of the film. He had no idea Phantom Thread would be his last project. He passionately got into the project, watching archival footage of fashion shows from the 40s and 50s, studying the lives of designers, and most importantly, he learned to sew. Day-Lewis seems a great fit for Woodcock, as he once wanted to be a furniture maker and loved the idea of craft. He was torn between this and acting. In an interview with Anderson, he reveals how Phantom Thread is a subversion, a hymn to women's upper hands and stronger stomachs. Reynolds is upstaged by his sister Cyril and turned subservient to his new muse Alma, a fumbling, blushing immigrant waitress. Anderson said the film came to him while he was sick home in bed and his wife took care of him. He said he realized the importance of the nurse and the ones we love who will take care of us when we are ill. Paul's work has transitioned to become more meditative on his life and career. While his earlier work still had the same amount of passion, it was clearly driven by nostalgia, and a beautiful way of paying homage to movies he loved. He's one of the few original filmmakers making films today that consistently feel bold and unique, and usually receive universal acclaim. He has not made one film that has divided audiences. His films are naturally shot, have original soundtracks, and use recurring collaborators. Anderson has grown comfortable with many of his cast members, such as John C. Reilly, Julianne Moore, and especially his muse, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Anderson recalls the first time he saw Hoffman on screen. When I first saw him in Scent of a Woman, I just knew what true love was. I knew what love at first sight was. It was the strangest feeling, sitting in a movie theater and thinking, he's for me, and I'm for him. And that was it.
He fired Kubrick right before it started, so it was prepped by none other than Stanley Kubrick.
Oh, that's right.
It'd be like me saying, I'm going to work with P.T. Anderson, and then fire him the first day when it's all set up. Hey, Karen, are you a genius?
With a collection of stories that span over 20 years, Anderson's films are considered some of the best ever made. His images have sealed a way of American life. His movies have become staples of the entertainment industry, with his work being far more personal and outreaching than other films released today. Paul Thomas Anderson is a singular voice, showing humans at their worst and at their very best. The film industry would be a much drier place without Paul Thomas Anderson.